people aren't listening. Like they're ready to just fire off that vegan talking point really quickly.
I am very naturally introverted, so I definitely needed like some help with like social skills. So I kind of went to them for that. Like I can't go out and do activism like 2 days in a row or anything like that. And I don't know, I feel like at some point you kind of just have to get over it.
All right, what's up everybody? This is Debug Your Brain and I'm here with Natalie, aka the Juggling Vegan, and we're just gonna kind of do a little interview today. So Juggling Vegan, tell us about your channel.
Yeah, so I mostly do street activism. I think it's a lot of fun. I do it in New Orleans. The main thing I do is give out free beer in exchange for conversations about veganism. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So I'm excited to sit down and talk shop about street activism and psychology and things like that.
Yeah, and your channel is really great because you just have so many people that you talk to, and just like the very interesting people, like different kinds of people, all walks of life. And I think you just really have a good handle of how to talk to people and how to sort of, how to get them onto your side, All right, so I guess I wanted to sort of start off just asking you, how did you get into veganism? How did you hear about it? What were your influences? Things like that.
Yeah, so I never wanted to be vegan or vegetarian. I remember when I was a kid or when I was a teenager, a lot of my friends were going vegetarian. I think it was right after Earthlings came out. And I was pissed off because we would always go to lunch together and like I wanted to go to Chick-fil-A and now they didn't want to go to Chick-fil-A. So I wrote a list like 10 reasons it's stupid to be vegetarian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I've been like a troll like my whole life. I think I could still make a really good case for that list, but my arguments now would be completely different. It'd be like dairy cows, ground up chicks. So I definitely never saw this as something I would be interested in. But then everything kind of started to change for me when I learned about the theory of the circle of moral concern. I know you've talked about that on your channel. Did that come from Peter Singer? Peter Singer, yeah. How basically we have extended our circle of compassion from some humans to different humans, and we would judge people based on arbitrary factors. So if it's possible that species is another arbitrary factor, and I think it's pretty clear to me now that it is, but I never really thought it was like an urgent issue. Like I didn't really care that much that animals were dying. I've always been like kind of selfish from the South, like very much not in that world. And then when the pandemic hit, that really changed everything for me because one of my friends is vegan. She's been vegan like 10 years. She's like my only vegan friend. Well, now I have more, but back then. And she posted something during the pandemic about how, 75% of new diseases come from animal agriculture. And I was like doing everything I could to prevent spread of coronavirus. I was like wearing a mask and, not going to work and not hanging out with my friends. But I was still buying these animal products. And I just felt really hypocritical about it. And so then I went to like reducitarian, and that worked until I encountered Earthling Ed. And like his arguments just completely won me over. And then I watched Dominion. And that's when I was like, I guess I'm going to be an activist too. Like
Dominion's the real nail in the coffin.
Yeah, you saw it too?
I haven't, but I've seen Land of Hope and Glory, which I've heard is very similar.
Yeah, so, that's Ed made that one, right?
Ed made that one, yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so how about you? What's your vegan journey?
Yeah, well, honestly, Earthling Ed also.
Really?
So, yeah, I know. Just funny. But actually, I'm an even more horrible person because I had actually read Practical Ethics by Peter Singer. Probably when I was like 26 years old. And it's not all about animal liberation, but it's definitely in there. So I was like, I had already been confronted with a very good version of, the case for not eating animals. But, I think I had left being like, yeah, that was a good argument. But there was no social pressure. There was no like anything to go any further than that. And so it just kind of sat there, I think that kind of had been like marinating in my mind for quite a long time. And then one other thing I remember is, seems so trivial, but there was sidewalk chalk activism at one point, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And it said a pig is as smart as a 3-year-old or something like that. And I remember I immediately was like, oh shit, that's, I was like, that's disturbing, Yeah. And so I remember I stopped eating like pig products for a little while after that,
I did the same. I stopped pigs like way before anything else.
Right. Yeah. And so it kind of faded a little bit, but then of course, again, there's no social pressure there. No one else is like,
it's the opposite. There's social pressure not to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so then also during the pandemic, I was just watching a lot of YouTube. So like less to do with, something specifically pandemic related. And I started watching, these Earthling Ed videos. And, as you said, I'm really interested in psychology, biases, all those things. And what actually started to convince me wasn't so much the arguments themselves, but the bad arguments given by what seemed to be otherwise smart people. And so what I noticed is these people, like, who otherwise throughout the interview you seemed like intelligent, were just giving some of the worst arguments I'd ever heard. And they were just falling prey to these biases in a way that I just, like, they would have never fallen prey to that fallacy or bias in any other situation. And so I was like, oh, wait a minute.
It's like a big red flag. Yeah.
I'm like, this doesn't seem good. And that's what really finally kind of got the ball rolling for me, I think.
Like when Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, plants feel pain. It's like so cringe. Oh, yeah. Oh my God, so cringe.
I think, like watching like a lot of intelligent people, like that's, and I was just talking about people like he was interviewing, but like the big name people who are like intellectual, to like even like, like Richard Dawkins or things like that. I think Richard Dawkins even like admits that it's wrong, but he's like, I can't quite stop,
Yeah, which I don't know if that's worse or better. Because like I feel like in some sense it's better because like at least they know it's wrong. But in some sense it's worse because like if I looked back through history and someone like knew something they were doing was very wrong but continued to do it, I think I would judge that person more harshly. So, but at the same time, whenever someone's to me like, oh yeah, I think it's fine to torture animals for taste pleasure, I'm like, well, that person's a trash bag. So like there's kind of different ways of looking at it. Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. For me personally, just because of like various things in my upbringing and stuff, it always annoys me more when someone won't admit it. Like me personally, I'm just like, just fucking admit it and just say you don't want to do it. Like lots of people do bad things. Just say you're one of them. Like, just please say it. Like, but it is true because it's like, well, now they know and they're still doing it.
I know. Yeah, it's tough. So, one thing I want to ask you about, you mentioned that after you went vegan, your girlfriend did and one of your friends did as well. So like, I'm curious, did you like have conversations with them or like, how did that process go?
Wow, you've watched my video catalog.
I watched like all of them yesterday and today.
Oh man, I did not do my research properly.
How dare you not? I have way more videos than you, so it's okay.
Yeah, no, so my girlfriend was a pretty easy sell. She kind of aligns with like Buddhist principles and things like that. And so she already kind of had this thing of not harm. We'd also kind of talked about pigs before and things like that. And so I just kind of like sat down and I talked to her about it and she was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like it was like the easiest vegan conversation ever. She was just like, okay. There were a couple of things where she was like, well, like, why honey? Why wool? Things that are
kind of the
less,
more like gray area stuff.
Right. Yeah. And stuff that's like not intuitive, like, because, you think you're like, well, they're just shaving a sheep. What's wrong with that?
Right. No, because it's like, oh, they need to be shaved. Then you watch the video and they're like being pulled apart and it's rough. Similar with my boyfriend, he went vegan about a month after I did, which, it was pretty easy because I do all the cooking. So like he didn't really have a choice that much, but there was a month where like he was still buying like meat for lunch. And that was right after I had watched Dominion. So like I wouldn't even sit in the room with him or anything. And then I was bugging him to watch it like every day. And eventually he did. And like, he's been totally on board since then. So it's been awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, it's good that he was able to watch it. My girlfriend literally cannot watch any scene. Like in a lot of my early videos, I would just like flash up, stuff like without any warning, just like here's something horrible happening. And she would watch a couple of those videos and she like just burst into tears after seeing like 3 seconds of it. So it's like for some people it's very powerful. And so for her, I have to actually give her like legitimate trigger warnings whenever we watch.
Yeah. I mean, I did that like the first time I watched Dominion. I was working from home. I was lying about having COVID because I didn't want to go to work. I like feel bad. And I just watched it throughout the day. I could only watch like 10 minutes at a time. And then I just like break down crying. And I've been vegan ever since. So.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So like, this is kind of the thing, like for me, it was a much more natural process for my girlfriend to go vegan than for me to go vegan.
Really?
Yeah, because like the thing is like, she likes animals. She's also like super empathetic, which is why like even like a second clip of a video like that just destroys her. But like I often say this to people who are like, I'm not an animal lover. I don't care about animals. And it's kind of weird because this will sound weird coming from me, but like I'm not an animal lover.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you say that because like I feel like very similarly as well. Like I mean, I love dogs and I love animals way more now. But so for you, it's more like I don't necessarily love them, but that doesn't mean I want to pay for them to be tortured, right?
Right. So like, yeah, and I it's the same thing with you. Like, I really like dogs.
Yeah.
Like, I clearly have a bias towards humans and dogs for who I like.
Yeah.
But that doesn't, like, the moral consideration and the way we treat them is unrelated. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like if someone said, man, I really, you know what, I don't like redheads. I hate them. I hate redheads. Like, yeah, yeah, right? It's like, even if I myself hated redheads, I was just like, they're the worst. Even if that was the case, yeah, there's gingers. Like, I still wouldn't be like, well, let's chop them up and put them in gas chambers, right? Like, that doesn't just follow from disliking something. Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
So like, when people say that, I'm like, that sounds on the surface like an argument, but it's not actually an argument.
Yeah,
And
which,
like,
I mean, all these arguments, when you look even a little bit, they fall apart, which is almost like all my vegetarian friends, like, how did they not have better arguments the whole time? Like, I feel like I would say, like, oh, animals eat other animals, and they wouldn't even know how to argue back. And it was just like, we need people who are interested in animal rights to know the responses to these, to know why they're logical fallacies and like what's wrong with them. And I think that's why Earthling Ed has been so successful, is because he like shows people how to do that. And that's kind of like what you do with your channel as well, like expose that sort of thing.
yeah.
Yeah. So what about your friend? How did that conversation go?
So that was an interesting one, because the one friend I've convinced is the person who I didn't like directly like give all my arguments to, which is what was interesting. So he is very pro-socialism, and not like democratic socialism, like socialism. And I've softened on my position on socialism, actually, but at the time I was like, democratic socialism sounds good, but any further than that's ridiculous. And that was kind of my position. And I was talking to him, and he was saying like, oh, you should be a socialist. And I was kind of like, being like, you should be a vegan. What I mostly talked to him about, I just described what it was like for me being vegan, and I didn't like give him any arguments for going vegan, which was the interesting part. I just kind of talked to him about like why I went vegan and why I thought it was important. And he didn't give me any pushback or anything like that.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks later, he was like, hey man, like, what do you eat for protein? On your vegan diet? And I was like, why?
I love getting those texts.
Yeah. He's like, I'm going vegan. You know?
Hell yeah.
And so I thought, you know, I've actually thought back on that now, and I'm like, is the approach I'm using wrong? Like, should I be even more like oblique and indirect when I'm talking to people, you know? So I don't know. It was an interesting experience, but.
Yeah. So like, have you, like, friends you've talked to, has it ever gone badly?
It hasn't. I don't it would have to go really bad for me to consider it go badly.
I've had some bad conversations.
So like, even if people are yelling at me, to me that's still like going pretty good.
Oh really? Like,
yeah.
You've had people yell at you?
I've had people get very heated and raise their voice. So like, two of my friends I kind of talked to, that it was like when I first went vegan.
That's always the worst time to do it, by the way.
Yeah. And they asked me about it, and my one friend was just completely unprepared for how much I've argued in my life about everything. So like, I have argued since I was a kid about everything. So I'm just like naturally good at arguing. Yeah. And you know, this is, you kind of alluded to this earlier, like, I think because everyone eats animal products, it's like in their mind, just subconsciously, they think they must have good arguments for it.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
And when you push back just a little bit, it's not just that they don't have good arguments. You can see like in their mind, they're like, oh fuck, why don't I have answers to these questions? This should have been easy. Everyone does this. Why don't I have an answer for it? You know? And so
I love when that happens, when I can like see that going on in someone. I'm just like, yes.
Like in their eyes, they're like, oh no. So so I've had, you know, ones where they kind of got heated and then sort of calmed down a little. My dad was the one that got the most heated. Ooh. So, you know, I went vegan and I had visited him, and hey buddy. I know you're a sweetheart. He's a guard dog. Yeah, he's adorable. What's his name?
Sal. Salvador doggy.
Hey Sal.
Hey buddy. I know. You're sweet.
But yeah, so my dad, he came at me pretty hard.
So he came at you. You didn't approach him.
No. In fact, I didn't approach any of my friends. Like they came more like a bug light to me, you know.
Interesting.
But they haven't come as much as I thought. And part of it is because a lot of them do know I'm a debate bro. Yeah. And so like, they're just like, I don't want to do that. Like,
they know they don't have a chance.
Well, they also, and they know that also I have no limit. Like after 5 minutes, they'll be like, I don't want to talk about this. I'm like, I'll talk about this for 5 hours.
I know, yeah. When I first went vegan, one of my friends, he's a lawyer, and you know, so he loves arguing. So we would just debate for like hours. he's not a vegan now. So I guess I haven't done that well. But then the thing where it got bad was if he got sick of talking to me, he would like sick me on someone else. He'd be like, go talk to him. And then I'd like go, I was already riled up. So I'd like go in full and then it would just be like a disaster. But that was because like I really wanted to be on the streets doing activism, but the vaccine wasn't out yet. So I was like, well, I can only talk to my friends. And like I knew I needed to get better at it because the first time you have these debates, at least for me, like even though I know what to say when someone says like, oh, plants feel pain, like until you've done it, you don't feel as prepared. So like once you've gotten a little practice, it's just so much easier. Yeah.
Yeah, that actually kind of leads me into two questions I wanted to ask you. The first one is, what did you find most challenging about going vegan? And how did that sort of differ from what you thought would be most challenging about going vegan?
Oh my God, so different. Like what I thought would be hard, I was like, oh, it's going to be so hard to cook all the time or like eating. Like I thought the practical stuff would be very, very difficult. And honestly, the biggest surprise was that like it's not difficult at all. But the emotional stuff has been like way harder. Like just kind of the knowledge of what's going on, like just knowing that like every second of every day, like pigs are like screaming in gas chambers, or just like the vast scale of the problem is like, it's almost incomprehensible, but at the same time, it's like, it's always kind of there with you, you know? So that's been really hard. And then also, yeah, just the social element, you know, just like, it's hardest when you're talking to someone and the things they're saying are just so stupid. And you're like, I can't believe that you, a good person, is saying that to me right now. Like, it's almost like it's hard not to like lose respect for people in certain situations. And like, that sucks. So yeah. How about for you?
I mean, the answer is pretty similar. Like,
Yeah.
It's like, you know, I'm like, oh man, where, like, am I going to get my protein from? Where am I going to get my nutrients from? Like, how hard is this going to, it's like, as you say, the practical questions are actually very simple, which is why when I hear people object to that part of it, I'm like, that's not the thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say the same as you. The main one for me is the social aspect. And it's even, I mean, it's super similar. It's funny how similar these answers are, but like specifically my friends who I respect and who are smart and empathetic and like will fight for other causes. Hearing their responses to this, it makes me cringe. And it's like you said, it's like I'm fighting to not lose respect for them. And the only thing I can really go on there is because I was the same way. Yeah. And like, I also didn't do it, except that I had read philosophical texts about it. So I'm like, I'm actually worse than them. And that's just how I like console myself. I'm like, they're probably better than me, actually.
But at the same time, like you hadn't had your friend make a case for it and
That's
argued
true.
against them, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, as soon as you like saw these debates, you did make the change. So I don't know I don't know what's worse, honestly.
Yeah. It is true. So and that's the thing is that I think that's really where I was just finishing up Earthling Ed's book as I was driving here. I was listening to it on audio. Yeah.
Nice.
And the final thing he talks about is that, you know, talking to your family and things like that, and how even he doesn't talk to his family about it too much. You know, like the most experienced debater on this topic there is, and I had the same thing, is that I don't go out of my way to talk to my friends about it, actually, for the reason I just said. Yeah. But I think it's actually probably the most important thing you can do, because you probably have the most influence on them. You can give that sustained social pressure, like, why don't you do this? You know what I mean? And you can show them, like, here's a vegan cheese or a vegan whatever, you know? And so, like, I think it's probably the most important thing to do, but it's also the hardest thing to do. So
do you think, though, that, like, because for me, I feel like it's almost less effective to talk to a friend than to have like a stranger talk to them, just because like I feel like there's that whole like relationship behind it, and like maybe they don't respect you that much, so hearing this from you is just like, oh, whatever, you know? Like for me, like I have never been that interested in like other social justice causes, or like I'm like, okay, I'm for it, but like I wasn't like active or doing anything. And some of my other friends are a lot more active than me, so like for me to tell them like, hey, you've been active for this for years, like why are you still eating meat? Like it's almost like they're like offended because it was coming from me, you know?
Yeah. I agree 100% with that, actually. I think like the funny thing is like even in my friend group, I would almost like, I might be like, just generally speaking, the least morally minded and the least ethical person. And so like for me to do it, they're like, fuck off. Like, you know what I mean? Like
it's
really?
Like that's how bad animal agriculture is. It's like they're trying to like hold me to a higher standard. I'm like, no, you just need to like look at what's going on, and then you'll see even a trash bag like me like won't support this.
That's exactly my position. I'm like, I've even like sort of made that case before. Like you guys, yeah, like you guys know, like I'm not like I'm not out there like doing like fighting social justice, all this stuff. Yeah. But it's just so obvious that I don't know, how you can ignore it. So
what do they say to that?
I don't even know. I don't even remember. A lot of times these are drunken conversations.
I know. Well, that's mostly what I do. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, a couple questions I was gonna ask. Let's see.
Oh, yeah, I did have one other one for you.
Okay, go for that because I can't remember.
After like piggybacking on the other thing you were talking about doing activism, but what have you found to be the most difficult thing about doing street activism? Like kind of from a like practical logistics, whatever sense like that, Yeah,
like getting out there can be hard. Like if the weather's not nice or like lately. This is so stupid, but it's the time change. I hate this fallback time because since I give out beer for the majority of what I do, it just works better later in the day, but it gets dark at 5. So I'm like, okay, it's kind of early to start drinking at like 2. So I'm like, I'll go out there at 3. And then people are still like not totally ready to start drinking then. And then it's just, that's really been difficult. And also, like, I do have some success. Like, people usually talk to me when I have my free beer. If you talk to me about veganism sign, like, people generally will come up. But there are some days where I just, like, don't get a lot of bites, or, like, maybe I'm just not in a good mood, and the conversations are just not as good. Like, I went out last week, and I just wasn't in a good mood, and, like, all the conversations I had were just, like, either the people were too weird and weren't making sense, but they were the only ones that would come talk to me, or one of them was, like, oh, I can't go vegan because there's not a 7 generations study about how it's good for you. It's like, okay, well, the oldest study in the world is like 173 years. Is that even 7 generations? Like, what are you talking about? So yeah, when they say things like that are like impossible to argue with, turns out she was like an anti-vegan who's a fan of that. You know that dentist that anti-vegans talk about a lot?
No.
It's this weird, he was like a dentist in the 30s. I think his last name's Price. And he like went on this journey to prove like the best diet and the best thing for your teeth. And like all of his stuff was discredited, but these anti-vegans like love him. And like I thought that it was made up, that like people didn't actually believe him. Yeah. Then I meet this woman and she's like talking about him and how she needs this 7 generational study. So yeah, that's really difficult. I think the most difficult thing for me is just like leaving conversations when I know they're not going anywhere. Like I need to be better about that because it's a waste of time talking to someone like that. You're just gonna piss them off more. They're gonna think you're even dumber, even though they're clearly wrong. Like I told her about the, American Dietetic Association, how they say vegan diets are safe, and she's like, I don't believe them. Like, okay, like there's nothing I can do with that. But yeah, what do you think is the most
that's difficult? A good point. Sorry, yeah, that's a good point about ejecting though. Like sometimes you have to eject. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I don't do that at all. I never eject. That's
really?
Like, well, kind of like what I was saying before is like, I'll just talk for 5 hours. Like I'm like, you don't understand. You're going to realize you're wrong eventually. If you talk to me. Like, that's kind of like my mentality. So I think, yeah, it's hard for me to sort of eject as well. Oh, hey.
Hey, Apollo.
Hey.
He's such a sweetheart. Let's see.
But difficult for me, I would, so yeah. That's interesting. I don't know. I think it's kind of like what you said is like the inertia is just getting out there to begin with. Once I'm out there, I'm good. And once I've had that like first interview of the day, I'm good to go. But that first one does feel a little rough. I'm a little awkward. And I'm like, hello.
Like, do you feel like nervous?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Too.
I definitely get the nerves.
Time.
Yeah.
Every time. It's so annoying.
Yeah. The first one is nerves. And then after that, I'm good. And I always feel better too. Like if my conversations are going well, I stay nervous more. But if I get someone who's like aggressive, then I can like finally calm down.
Really?
Yeah, it's weird. I know. I've got some weird stuff like that. Like I want a little bit of like spice in there. Like I don't want it, but like for my emotional health, I want it.
I feel like for my channel, I want it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Because sometimes it's just people agreeing with me the whole time. I'm like, that's great that they're agreeing, but it's not the best video to watch. Like the ones where people are like mad at me or like, that's the best YouTube watching. So what do you do, like AV and stuff?
I did one AV once, and I held the TV the whole time. Okay. It was my first time, and I felt like, oh, I need to like do my, I can stand the whole time with this. Yeah. And I hadn't gone back since, just because my time is so limited. Yeah. And so it's between like researching videos, editing videos, and then doing street activism. I was like, there's not as much space there for me to do that. And I kind of would rather go out, if I have the time, I'd rather go out and do solo activism.
Really?
Than
with the group?
than with a group. Yeah. And it's nothing against AV. I just, I don't know. I like the aspect of solo activism. It feels more, I like the challenge of it. It's like I like not having backup. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want people to feel like they're walking up and there's like 6 people around them who are all like, hey, you're wrong. It's just like, it's just me. Like, I'm just chilling. Like, there's like, you know, you're safe here, right? So
Totally.
I kind of like that vibe more, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I do it. I like both. There's not an AV in New Orleans, but like if I go to different cities, I'll try to meet up with them. Like, I feel like there is a lot of value in showing footage. Like, if people can see the footage, they just can feel your sense of urgency more. Like, when I'm talking to people on the streets, like, it's hard to get across how bad the situation is and like how dire it is. So that's kind of a struggle as well. But I'm also like, you know, street activism I think is great in terms of the most effective activism. I wouldn't really put it up there, but I think it's great for vegans to watch, to learn more about like what they're dealing with, to see how the public perception of veganism is changing. And I almost come at it more from like an angle of entertainment. And I'm like, okay, these videos are entertaining and I like making them and they're fun. But like in my day-to-day life, like I thought your video about like systemic change and that was awesome. But I do try to focus more on systemic change, like when I'm not doing street outreach and things like that.
Yeah, I think the thing for me with the thing that makes street outreach the multiplier that you can give it is that it's a YouTube video, right? Like,
exactly.
If I just was out there talking to 4 people and it took me 4 hours, that's not a lot of like value, like conversion rate. But being able to put it up on YouTube and having, you know, hundreds, like, well, right now hundreds, hopefully thousands of people watch it, you know, eventually it's like I think that's, and you know, I'm probably biased because that's kind of what turned me. It was like watching a video.
Me too.
Right?
Yeah. So. I'm like, Earthling Ed is what made me vegan. So like, there's just that big bias in me that's like, this is how you should do activism, you know, and it kind of just vibes with my personality naturally. Like, I'm not like a super aggressive person. So it kind of works out.
You and me are different in that way then.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm
you're
actually
way more aggressive.
I'm actually super aggressive, and in all my videos what you're seeing is me like pushing it down. Just push it down. Don't turn into an asshole. Don't be a dick to this person, you know?
Well, you're good at turning it down. I mean, like, because you seem very like happy and like smiley in your videos and whatnot, which I think is good. Yeah, so I guess I kind of want to talk about some of like the more social dynamics of it. Like when you're in a conversation with people, are you thinking about like body language or like how you're coming across? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, my brain's going a million miles per minute when I'm doing like a lot of times, like, because I rewatch my videos and I'm like, oh, like in this 5-minute conversation I say like 10 words. You had said in one of the comments on one of my videos that Charlie and Ben of the Charlie and Ben podcast were an influence on you going vegan, and I found that very surprising because I've never heard anyone say that before.
Well, I don't think anyone really watches their podcast besides me. But yeah, it's great. It's these 2 guys, and they're entrepreneurs, and they've always been very like. When I was in college, I read the 4-Hour Work Week, and I was like, oh, this is a great book. Like, I don't want to just be in this kind of rat race. Like, I want to kind of do more lifestyle design like that. And that's very much something they were working on. And veganism was not something that I really associated with people that I respect or people that were successful in any way. So then seeing these people who were very successful in my eyes, like make a really good case for veganism. And, you know, I was into like lifting weights back then and all this shit. And they're like super buff and like, you don't need to eat animal protein to work out. And it became a lot more compelling. And they introduced me to the circle of moral concern theory.
Oh, okay.
So that's
nice.
how like I found out about that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
But yeah, as someone who's like, you know, I am very naturally introverted. So I definitely needed like some help with like social skills. Yeah. So I kind of went to them for that, and then other things as well.
Okay. Interesting. So that's kind of what got you into them.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Thing. Yeah.
So how does that introversion play into your activism?
Yeah, so like it definitely limits it a little bit. Like I can't go out and do activism like 2 days in a row or anything like that. And I don't know, I feel like at some point you kind of just have to get over it. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, you're shy, you're introverted, like that sucks, but these animals are being tortured, and like you just have to put yourself aside and just you're gonna have to feel uncomfortable, especially when you're standing there with a sign and no one's talking to you. Like it feels very weird. Yeah. But you just have to remember like why you're there. And yeah, I think it also kind of helps because it makes me a way better listener. Like I've always been more of a listener than a talker. So like I can really kind of deeply listen to what people are saying without thinking necessarily what I'm going to say next, and just be very like in the moment with them. And then that allows me to like just get a feel for what they're really saying as opposed to what they think they're saying. And then I can kind of cut in there. So yeah, I think it helps, but you're extroverted.
Yeah. So I'm a little different. I have the opposite experience to you. So there is a disadvantage to being extroverted and doing this, at least in the way that I am, I guess, because after I do it, I feel like I'm on cocaine and I go home and I annoy the shit out of my girlfriend. I can't go to sleep. Like I have insomnia that night. Like
that kind of happens to me too.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's not just, maybe it's not an introversion extroversion thing, but yeah.
But I'm also usually drunk. So
okay. All right.
that kind of helps the sleep.
Yeah. That's hilarious. Yeah. Do you then like replay all the like constantly, days. Just like, oh, I could have said this maybe if I would have said this, like
every single conversation. And that's another thing about filming that I think is valuable. Not only can you share it, but you can rewatch what you did and where you went wrong, and like if there's something in their body language that you didn't pick up that was like a signal, and you can see where you lost rapport and where you can build it up again, and that kind of thing.
I agree 1,000,000%. It's true. It's like you go through and you watch it and you learn so much from watching yourself. You see so many things you didn't see before. People are saying things. It's I think it's actually a really valuable experience to do. To not just be active, but to film yourself being active and having that sort of recursive. And
then you have a better memory of the whole thing. Like sometimes I'll have a conversation, like I remember bits and pieces of it, but I forget a lot of it. And yeah, it's great. And a lot of times though, like people I talk to don't want to be on camera, so what I film and what's on my channel is like a very small percentage of what I'm actually doing. So that's kind of a bummer, because I wish I could like have all of them recorded.
Yeah. Did you know that Cosmic Skeptic was on the Charlie and Ben podcast? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I saw it.
I thought that was so good. Like whenever that happened, I was like, what the fuck is going on? I was like, this collab like came out of nowhere to me, you know?
I would love it if Earthling Ed went on there, because I know he like is a fan of their videos. He's like mentioned them a couple times.
Earthling Ed has?
Yeah. There's that one video, signs someone's going into cognitive dissonance, which has been super helpful to me, because you can see like they're going into cognitive dissonance, which is just that their actions aren't in line with their beliefs. And I forget what the signs are, but basically when they start like attacking you personally, that's a big one, things like that, and how to reestablish rapport in your relationship when someone is going into cognitive dissonance. So for example, like for me, whenever someone says plants feel pain, to me that's a sign that like this interaction is in a bad place. And I need to like reestablish a connection with them and like make a joke, break the tension somehow. Or even when this guy was like, plants feel pain, blah, I'm a hunter, something stupid. And I was like, hey man, like I really appreciate you talking to me, you know, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Or, like you just have to bring yourself down a peg and make them feel valued. And then after that, it was like a totally different conversation. So yeah, there are things that you need to be aware of when you're doing activism. Yeah,
I totally agree. I was interviewing this one woman, and I like told her what we were going to do. I was like, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. She goes, oh my God. She got really nervous, and, you know, it was like, I feel like it was important to tell her, like, look, this is like, you can leave at any time. I'm not holding you here. You know, if you feel uncomfortable, you can just say, I feel comfortable, you know, whatever, and just leave whenever, and just make them feel, like you said, valued, but also safe, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Like you're not here to tear them down.
Yeah, you're just there to like talk.
Yeah. It's a hard conversation, but it's still just a conversation, you know?
Yeah. So, do you have any like, what are some mistakes that you see street activists making?
That's a good question. So I think the first thing is I feel, because I haven't done that much street activism, I feel like weird saying like, oh, that's a mistake. I know better than you know, things like that. But,
hey, you don't have to do it to judge someone else. Like look at football coaches, right?
I think the thing I see the most is kind of what we were alluding to already, is that people aren't listening. Like they're ready to just fire off that vegan talking point really quickly. You know, I've seen a lot of people do that where someone like starts to talk and they're like, well, what about this and this and this? Well, this many animals died and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, there's something called the curse of knowledge, which is like when you know something, it's hard for you to realize that someone can't download all that information as quickly as you can, like when you're talking to them. And so I see that a lot where people think, oh, if I just say this to them, they're going to know it. They're going to like onboard it, but they're not. Like they need time, you know? And so I think that's probably one of the biggest things I see is just like vomiting the vegan talking
because there's so much that we know that other people don't know. And it's like, they have no idea how many animals are killed. Like, you know that. You know how much water's used. You know how bad it is for the climate. But if you just spew all that out, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think for me, that's the biggest thing I see. Beyond that, I would just say I have different sort of inclinations about what works and what doesn't, you know? So like the question is, you know, do you take a harsher approach or a lighter touch or like a really harsh approach, you know, like.
What do you think?
I think that, you know, it's like a Venn diagram, right? Yeah. Like some people are going to be convinced by a harsh approach and a light approach. Some people are going to be only convinced by a harsh approach and some are only going to be convinced by a light approach. But I do think that it skews towards the light approach. Yeah. So like, I think that the Venn diagram is shifted so that a lighter, more respectful touch probably convinces people more. And that's not to say that you shouldn't make them feel uncomfortable. I really think being uncomfortable is an important part of it.
Absolutely. People don't make changes unless like, I mean, like watching the footage is a painful experience for you. So that's kind of like where that change comes from a lot of the time.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think, you know, the thing is like the footage and the questions are uncomfortable by their very nature. Like I don't think you need to like be yelling at the person so much or like,
I don't think yelling is ever
you know,
not usually a good idea.
Yeah, like I mean, I guess if you think like the softest approach is kind of Earthling Ed, a middle road is like Joey Carbstrong, and then like the super harsh would be like Vegan Gains or something, you know? Like challenging people to cage matches when they disagree with you. So like I think
it works for some people.
For some people, So for some people that will work. But I would think if I were to like be designing the universe and making vegan activists, I wouldn't make very many vegan gains.
Like
a
few.
I'd sprinkle them in on the top very. You know?
No, I think that's a good assessment. Is that everyone's gonna respond differently, but in general, most people are more agreeable when you're nicer to them. Yeah, I guess a lot of mistakes I see have to do with like kind of basic body language stuff. I won't name the people I'm talking about a lot because they're like smaller street activists, but I'll see them like when they're interviewing someone, like someone will be sitting on a bench and they're like towering over them, like asking them questions, and it feels very uncomfortable. Like if you're ever at dinner and like one person's standing there and everyone else is sitting, like it just feels weird. So you want to make sure that if that person's sitting that you're talking to, you want to sit. If they're standing, stand. Like try to match them and be on the same side as much as possible. Because if you're, you know, face to face with somebody, then it feels like you're arguing. But if you're next to them, you feel more like you're on the same side. And that's great for like, even like dating. Like if I go to a restaurant with my boyfriend, we're like, we don't want to sit across from each other. Like it's much more fun if we're next to each other. It's easier to talk and it's a better experience overall.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you mentioned that too. You said that in one of my videos. You're like, stop looking at the person directly. like stand to the side of them or whatever.
I mean, I think it puts them more at ease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's definitely true. And especially the towering over them. That's like a really obvious one that you don't want to do. You know?
Or like in one of my videos, there's a point where like I'm talking to someone next to a wall and it feels like I've like trapped them against the wall, but I was like, I cannot stand in that position again. Like I have to make sure that I'm not trapping anyone anywhere. Even if I'm not, that's like, it has to be clear that that's not my intention.
Mm-hmm. For sure. That's true. And it's good to, I think, you know, do that via body language, but also maybe sometimes verbally do it. Just say it out loud, you know, just like really hit every point. Like you're not trapped here, you're safe here. My body language is saying you're safe here, you know. Just
and like smiling and laughing. Like, it's always good.
Yeah. I feel like I do that too much in my videos.
You said that. I was like, oh, you're fine.
I don't even try it. I just like talking to people so much that even if I'm talking about something like where I disagree with them, I'm still like smiling and laughing. Because I'm like, oh, I get to talk to people about
You're just like happy to be there. That's awesome. I think that is a good disposition to have for street activism, for sure.
Hopefully. And a special shout out to my top tier patrons, Ryan O'Neill and Tom Eisenbeiss.